Bienvenidos a Tres Respuestas, un espacio de opinión, de discusión y de propuestas. Nuestro invitado de hoy es Adam Grant, una de las figuras más importantes de la psicología organizacional a nivel del mundo. Es el profesor tenure más joven que ha tenido el Wharton School of Business, autor de importantes libros y recientemente Hidden Potential, Potencial Escondido, un libro maravilloso para entender el comportamiento del ser humano en distintas circunstancias. Y además de todo esto, Adam Grant también es mago, campeón de buceo y de clavados, y es sobre todo una persona que todos los días está influyendo sobre cómo mejorar el desempeño organizacional. Adam, it's such a pleasure to have you in our podcast.
Estoy muy contento para estar aquí. Podemos hablar en español si quieres.
Bueno, me parece muy bien. Podemos hacer un poquito de los dos. So, you want me to, should I jump into English or you want to do it in Spanish?
Your English is much better than my Spanish.
Oh, okay, all right. So, Adam, I'm so happy to have you here in our podcast. As I was saying, you have become one of the brightest minds in organizational psychology. You have published books that have become every day, not only reference reading, but also influential in the way corporations and humans behave. But I want to begin by asking you about Adam Grant, that kid that was raised in Michigan, who was a diving champion, who wanted to be a basketball player, who's a magician, and who decided to embrace this marvelous career over organizational behavior. Why don't you tell us about your own life process? Because I think there are many people who want to know how you became the youngest tenure professor in Wharton, and how do you plan your books and your ideas. So it's great to know a little bit about you and your life.
Wow. Well, you've done your homework, my friend. I feel like I should be asking you to tell me my life story based on that. But maybe I'll tell you about a moment that was pivotal for me, which is, I ended up in springboard diving because I was too short for basketball and too slow for track and not coordinated enough for soccer, football, and eventually sort of ran out of sports. And when I got into diving, I had a lot of disadvantages. And one of them was that I was afraid of heights, which I probably shouldn't have been doing that sport in retrospect. But when it came time to try a new dive, I was just terrified. I would stand at the end of the board shaking. I was afraid that I would end up doing a belly smack or a back flop. I was worried that I would get lost in midair. And, usually after 5 or 10 minutes, I would finally muster up the courage and go. But I remember one day I was supposed to do a full twisting 2.5, which is 2 flips, a 360 turn, and then a dive into the water. And I just couldn't get myself to go. And I stood on the board shaking for 45 minutes. And finally, my coach, Eric Best, looked at me and said, "Adam, are you going to do this dive?" And I was like, "Ever?" Like, yes, one day I would love to do this dive. And he said, "Great. What are you waiting for?" And all of a sudden it hit me that I was waiting to feel ready before I took the leap. But the only way I could become ready was by taking the leap. And I think that experience taught me that I had the relationship between confidence and action backward. I thought that I needed to find the confidence before I acted. It was actually through acting that I could build my confidence. And that became a major source of motivation for me. I think every time I've been afraid to do something new, whether it was pursue a career in organizational psychology or write a book or give a TED Talk, and I've hesitated, I've heard Eric's voice in my head. Are you going to do this one day? Yes. Why not now?
Well, that's simply amazing. And so when you had that call by your coach, how does that call also push you to embrace this idea of getting to know more the way organizations behave and how we can get organizations to behave in a much better way? I mean, what drove you to say, this is what I want to dedicate my life to?
Well, a lot of diving was really trying to motivate myself, and then as I became a coach, trying to figure out how to motivate others. And when I got into the world of work, I saw the exact same challenges. I saw leaders struggling to motivate their employees. I saw employees struggling to motivate themselves. And I thought it was a bit of a travesty that most of us spend the majority of our waking hours at work, but very few of us find that time meaningful and fulfilling. And I wanted to try to change that. And at first, my mission was to try to make, work exciting and uplifting for people. The feedback was that's too hard. The bar for there is too high. So now my mission is much simpler. It's to make work not suck. And I think if we could do that, we would have a much healthier and happier society. The big question is how to do that. And I've spent some of my time looking at how to redesign jobs so that people can see the impact they have on others. I've spent some of my time trying to sort of break toxic cultures and make sure that people are treated more respectfully by their leaders and managers. And I guess increasingly, I'm trying to figure out what else we can do to change the behavior of leaders so that they they elevate people's lives instead of undermining them.
Well, when I hear that, I just start thinking about this amazing book that you wrote called Give and Take, that has been now published in multiple languages, that has been embraced by companies, and it has also opened the scope for you to be influential in trying to identify who are the givers and the takers in a certain organization. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that concept of giving and take? And let me ask you, where do you find yourself? More of a giver, of a taker? And how can, if we're givers, how we should identify that, and if we're takers, how can we become givers? So you have also identified that givers are much better performers in the workforce.
Well, it's not my place to judge, right? I think I can tell you that I aspire to be a giver, but whether I succeed in that is in the eye of the beholder. So you'd have to ask people who interact with me regularly to find out who I really am. But when I look at this spectrum, what I found is across industries, across countries, most people have a default style of interaction at work. So givers are the people who are constantly asking, "What can I do for you?" Takers are the opposite. They want to know, "What will you do for me?" And many people are afraid to be that selfish or that generous, so they choose a third style called matching, which is I'll do something for you if you do something for me. And I think, when I wrote Give and Take, I was very focused on the individual styles and the idea that a lot of givers fail in the short run because they end up burning out, trying to help all the people all the time with all the requests. They get exploited by the takers around them. But in the long run, givers end up with the highest levels of success because they build more social capital, because they learn more through the time they spend helping others, and because they're motivated by a sense of purpose to contribute to something and someone larger than themselves. Over time, what I've come to realize is organizations also have cultures that can be defined as giving, taking, or matching. And so we should think about what it means not just to have an individual style that embraces generosity, but also how do we create values and norms that tip the whole group or an entire population more in a helping direction. So I guess on the individual level, I would start by saying if you want to identify your own style, you have to get feedback from the people who know you well. And sometimes this is an uncomfortable exercise. I don't know a lot of people who want to be told, "Yeah, I'm really sorry, but I think you're a taker." But I think I think there's real value in asking people, how do I show up in my relationships? What is my reputation? Am I seen as somebody who helps others with no strings attached? Am I seen as kind of a quid pro quo person? Or, do people sometimes think that I'm a little transactional and I'll only do something if I get more back in exchange? And I think that that self-awareness is really critical to begin then figuring out, okay, how do I either, if I'm a giver, how do I make sure I'm not too selfless? And we can talk about that. And if I'm a taker, who are the people I want to help? What are the ways that I want to add value where I have a unique contribution to make? And then how can I build that into my day?
Well, I have to say that when I read the book, man, I made a lot of reflections, whether I was a giver, a taker, of a matcher. Fortunately, I think I got to define myself more as a giver, and maybe some of my friends said that at some point. But I also want to say that you're a giver. I mean, I've had the possibility to interact with you in multiple ways, and I think you're always thinking on how can you contribute to your interlocutor, to your friends, to the people that you have close, but also to anybody who approaches you. And that takes me to the other question, because once you made such a great analysis and give and take, you came out with the originals. And the originals has to do with authenticity, has to do with identifying those who are the genuine creators. And that basically takes me to ask you, how would you match give and take with the originals? And how can we see ourselves as real originals, or how can we develop the originals skills?
Well, originals actually, it really grew out of a puzzle that I ran into in give and take, which is I kept getting typecast as the guy who claimed that nice guys finish first. And I wanted to correct that over and over again, saying one, nice guys don't always finish first. Sometimes they finish last. But two, don't confuse being a giver with being nice. There are a lot of disagreeable givers out there who, dish out tough love, who might be gruff and tough on the surface, but they're doing it because they want to challenge people and push them to do better. And what I was finding in my research was that disagreeable givers were often the people who drove change in the world because they were not content with the status quo. And they were unafraid to tell other people, I think there's a better way. And that really was the genesis of originals, to say, what does it take to become more of a person who challenges the way it's always been done and, helps us improve as opposed to just accepting old traditions that no longer make sense. And I think that for me, the heart of originality is a pretty simple question. It's asking, not like, have I created something that's unique and never existed before, but rather, can I do something that's different and better than what's currently in front of me? And I had some assumptions about original thinkers that turned out to be wrong. I thought they were first movers always, that they were kind of early birds. I assumed that they were risk lovers, and I thought that they were people who would go out of their way to prioritize, sort of a single-minded commitment. And all three of those assumptions turned out not only to be wrong, but backward. Um, it turned out I found that a lot of originals are procrastinators. They don't wait until the last minute, but instead of rushing ahead with their first idea, they have the patience to consider lots of possibilities and wait for their best idea. That they actually really don't like taking risk. Failed originals take lots of crazy risks, but the successful ones are the ones who build a balanced portfolio, almost like a series of stock market investments, and say, if I have to take a risk here, then I'm going to have a bunch of very safe bets to cover for that. And that goes to the last point, which is a lot of great original thinkers were very much hedging their bets. So they would have a day job and delay going into entrepreneurship because they wanted to make sure if they failed that they had a backup plan. They would test out lots of projects and ideas in order to make sure that one of them would succeed, as opposed to just going all in on one idea they were excited about. And so I guess what I took away from that is that there's a little bit of originality in all of us, and you shouldn't count yourself out just because you think, I'm not a first mover. I'm not a risk taker. I'm not, obsessed with one idea.
And I think I tend to believe sometimes that organizations tend to punish in some sort of way the originals, because sometimes they get so stuck on having this on the box or inside the box thinking, and they don't allow many people to really try to embrace a change. Do you think the originals are more entrepreneurial and maybe less easy to be under authority, that they rather be not under authority and be their own leaders? Or do you think organizations can really become successful at nurturing, empowering, and maybe mentoring the originals?
I want to vote for both. I think what we do see over and over again is that people who have original ideas, as they get thwarted in organizations, when they get silenced, when they get ignored, eventually get frustrated and tend to take their ideas elsewhere. In some cases, that means striking out on their own and launching a startup. In other cases, it means looking for an organization where their voices can be heard. I think that it's up to leaders to try to figure out how to build an environment where originality flourishes. And I've studied some great examples of this over the years. One of my favorites was at Pixar, when they were coming off a few big successes, the Toy Story movies. There were some talking bugs, there were some monsters, and to their credit, Ed Catmull and Steve Jobs said we need to shake things up, and they brought in an outside director, Brad Bird, who was coming off a major flop. And Brad had this bold vision that nobody saw potential in. He was told it was way too expensive, it was way too time consuming, it was too hard. And Brad is intensely disagreeable. He's one of those originals who loves to rock the boat. And he'd been
Mhm.
fired already by Disney for being too contrarian and too critical. And he basically said, "I'm going to round up people like me." And he said, "I want at Pixar the people who are dissatisfied, disgruntled, the people who are black sheep and pirates." And he rounded them up and he said, "Nobody thinks we can do this, and we need to prove them wrong." And they ended up making their movie well under budget and also much faster than projected. And it became their biggest hit yet. It was called The Incredibles. And I think it was a great example of how you can take people who are original thinkers, who are disagreeable, who do like to, sort of push past the way that we're comfortable doing things, and give them free reign to try to do things a little bit differently. One of the big challenges they faced in Incredibles, which I thought was fascinating, was they didn't know how to animate human superheroes. Like bugs and toys are much easier to do. And the pirates figured out that they didn't actually need to animate everything. That they could use film footage of water, for example, and just sneak that in, and the audience wouldn't mind. They realized instead of trying to code an entire human muscle, they could just take ovals and kind of slide them against each other with animation. And so they had all these shortcuts because they weren't attached to the orthodoxy. And I think we ought to think more about how we can be Brad Birds in the world, and find those disagreeable people, and give them a voice and a platform.
So if we continue the evolution of your works and your studies, and we see that we have talked about the givers, the takers, the matchers, now the originals. Think Again was also a way of pushing us to the reflection on how is it that sometimes we should reconsider or have maybe a better understanding of circumstances where we just take an assumption, prejudice, or in some sort of way we're skewed to a certain theory or to a certain approach. What do you think was also the complement that you brought with Think Again, Adam?
Well, in some ways, on the heels of originals, I was troubled by the fact that so many people resist change, and that so many ideas end up being ahead of their time, and people weren't ready for them, and then they regret them. And we've seen many companies go out of business not because leaders were bad at thinking, but because they were too slow at rethinking. We've seen democracies struggle, and I think we have many democracies in peril right now, in part because we have leaders who are unwilling or unable to think again. And I wanted to understand better why that is. And one of my key findings is that too many people spend too much of their time thinking like preachers, prosecutors, and politicians. So when you go into preacher mode, you're basically proselytizing your own views. In prosecutor mode, you're attacking somebody else's views. And in politician mode, with apologies to all former politicians in this conversation, sometimes you don't even bother to listen to people unless they already agree with your views. And I wanted to know how we could get out of those traps, but I have to ask El Presidente, what is your biggest challenge of those three? Is it preaching, prosecuting, or politicking?
Well, particularly when I read the book, I was always thinking on conversations that I had with my father, where always used to say that the much better politician is the one that devotes more time to listening and who's not afraid of having contrary voices. Because I think, as Thomas Jefferson used to say, when too much people think alike, there's not too much thinking going on. So you need to have those diverse opinions, and then you can get to your own assessment, and you have to rethink fast. So for me, it was a lesson that I took earlier. But once I had the chance to read the book, I also started questioning myself, what kind of methods should we have to know when and how to constantly rethink, which is not to doubt, but it's always to have the possibility to look at other options. And I think that's the essence of what the book gives us a lesson. But then now I turn the question to you. Do you think is it possible to systematize a way of rethinking so that constantly you can use those exercises to improve your behavior and your performance as an organization or as individuals?
I hope so. I think you're right. I think that great minds don't think alike. They challenge each other to think again. And one of the ways they do that is they try to think less like preachers, prosecutors, and politicians, and a little more like scientists. And when I say think like a scientist, I don't mean go buy a microscope or invest in a telescope. I mean have the humility to know what you don't know and the curiosity to keep seeking new knowledge. We know that good scientists are as motivated to look for reasons why they might be wrong as for reasons why they must be right. We know that they don't let their ideas become their identities. And I think that all of us as individuals, but also thinking collectively as groups and organizations, can adopt a little bit more of a scientific mindset. That means treating your opinions as hypotheses as opposed to certainties. It means treating your decisions as experiments, and basically being willing to run more A/B tests in your life. One of the ways I've encouraged organizations to adopt this mode is to say, look, we all know the value of a postmortem when a decision goes horribly wrong, to review what can we learn from that and how do we prevent it next time. I love postmortems. It is the dumbest time to run them. Why would you wait until you've already failed to then start learning? There's research showing that premortems can actually be more effective. That if you're about to make a big decision, and let's be clear, I don't think you can do this for every decision, because if we rethought everything all the time, we'd never execute or get anything done. But with high stakes decisions that would be hard to reverse and have big consequences, premortem is a great way to say, let's assume this choice has already failed, or we end up regretting it in the next few years. What are the most likely causes of that mistake? And what that does is it allows us to rethink our assumptions in advance before it's too late, so that we can avoid the problems that we don't see coming around the corner. And I love that as a way to get people to do a little bit more and also faster rethinking.
I think that's an amazing answer. And that also takes me to your new book, Ed. I think hidden potential, it's also a way to continue this narrative where I think givers, originals, people who are able to think again have a much better condition to prosper or to bloom. But also, I think you have now touched something that is very important, and is how do we identify our hidden potential? And you start the book with this reflection on Tupac Shakur and about the possibility of the flower to grow in an adverse ground. And that is the hidden potential. That's something that maybe the common wisdom will say it's not going to flourish. It does flourish because there's something special to it. Why don't you tell us why did you decided to embrace now the hidden potential as the continuation of your organizational psychology assessment?
I just watched so many people who struggled at a task or a skill initially and then said, well, I don't have the the natural talent to be successful in this area, so I might as well quit. And I knew from the research, but also from personal experience, that that was short-sighted and a little bit misguided. Because if you look at, I love, for example, work on world-class musicians, athletes, artists, scientists, mathematicians, across the board, the people who go on to be the greatest in their field were not identified as having unusual talent by their first teachers and coaches. When they stood out, it was because they were unusually motivated and driven and passionate. And I think what that tells us, and there's a lot of science to back this up, is that struggling initially at a skill doesn't mean that you lack aptitude. Sometimes it actually means that you're going to become a deeper learner because you have to work harder to master it and you're going to understand it better. And I'd live this. As a diver, if I had judged my potential by my early failures, I would have quit. People called me Frankenstein because I couldn't really touch my toes without bending my knees, and I was really stiff when I walked. I didn't jump high. I wasn't very coordinated. not at all graceful, very little explosive power. But I had a lot of passion, and I had a great coach who saw more potential in me than I saw in myself. And I've just lived that story and over and over again. I failed as a teacher early on. I failed as a writer early on. And I was really lucky to have people who believed in me. And I think one of my big lessons in writing Hidden Potential is that we all have cheerleaders and critics in our lives, and we need more coaches. I think a cheerleader is somebody who only sees your best self and applauds it. And a critic is somebody who only sees your worst self and attacks it. A coach is somebody who sees your hidden potential and tries to help you realize it. And I think obviously we want those people around us, but we also want to play that role in other people's lives.
Well, you mentioned in this great book, the Ranging Rooks, and Maureen Oshley, this coach who was able to take this high school chess team to become very successful, and they were not particularly the top performers in multiple ways, but they had something special about how they promoted, they encouraged the hidden talent. What lessons would you share with us that you take from that analysis of Maureen Ashley and the Ranging Rooks?
Well, one of the things that Maurice Ashley did as a young chess coach was he got kids excited about playing chess by teaching the game backward. I think most of us, the way I learned chess was starting moves, right? What's the opening? You can move a pawn 2 squares up or 1 squares up, and maybe it's better to start with the king's pawn and the queen's pawn. Well, what Maurice realized is that kids don't get fired up about starting. They get fired up about winning. And they also sometimes get highly motivated when they lose because they hate losing. So he said, we're not going to teach them how to start the game. Well, I'm just going to put a few pieces on the board and I'm going to teach them how to checkmate. And they're going to experience the joy of victory and the agony of defeat. And then they're going to want to know how to build to that point where they can checkmate their opponent as opposed to getting checkmated. And I think this is a really powerful idea of starting backward. I think it's a way of exposing kids, especially to the kinds of rewards and also disappointments that add motivation. And over time, what he then did was he said, okay, I want to build not just the cognitive skills to make you good at chess, the strategy, but also the character skills, the proactivity, the discipline, the determination that it takes to outwit your opponent. And that ultimately seems to be what took a very disadvantaged group of kids to become national champions. That they were better at overriding their unpleasant and unwanted emotions. They were more effective at self-control. They were more patient in anticipating what a sequence of moves would do, as opposed to kind of just diving in to the first good move. And I think the lessons there around, starting with motivation and what makes it fun to learn, and then saying over time, we want to build your character skills, not just your thinking skills, I think is a great takeaway for all of us.
Well, I love the chapter about the character capabilities and how to nurture their character capabilities. Do you think organizations are spending the right amount of time to identify those character capabilities? And you think they're really being able to encourage those character capabilities to become the driving force of working performance?
No, I don't think we're spending enough time on character skills at all. So one of the things we know about character skills is they teach us they're a window into how far you're likely to go, how much capacity for growth you have. And I think that's what hidden potential is, right? It's an aptitude for growth that might be invisible to you or to other people. And the proactivity, the discipline, the determination, those factors are what ultimately allow people to transcend the limitations of their starting levels of talent. And when we look at how organizations select people, there's not a lot of attention to character skills. We tend to look at how many years of work experience people have, which turns out to be a terrible predictor of performance. We don't know whether, if you have 20 years of experience in a job, if you've actually been learning those 20 years, or whether you've had this same year of experience repeated 20 times and stagnated all that time. We look at sometimes past performance, but we don't know whether your past performance in one job is relevant to how successful you're going to be in another job. And I think especially in a rapidly changing world, we make the mistake of trying to measure ability when what really matters is agility, right? It's the people who are motivated and able to learn who ultimately achieve the most and contribute the most. And I think there are lots of ways that organizations could do a better job both selecting and nurturing that. But one I'll point out is when we interview people, we usually just give them one shot. If it goes well, we hire them. If it doesn't, we reject them. There's evidence coming out of the military that if you give people a do-over, a second shot at the interview, that you get a better window into their likelihood of success because you can actually track how much they've improved from the first try to the second try. And I think that every workplace ought to give candidates do-overs.
Well, I think that's why maybe you talk so much, or you mention so much in the book, the idea of training, practice, but also professors. How can maybe professors become much better in the way they guide the training? And how much do you think professors are the ones who can really help you identify and motivate that hidden potential? I mean, you talked about your own experience as a diver, and you know, many people have said that they became great when they had a trainer or a coach or a leader or a professor who saw something that nobody else was seeing. How do you think we have to do much better as a society, maybe in the education system and also in the labor market, so that we can have people who are more aware of identifying that hidden potential?
I think there's a lot we could learn about this from Finland and Estonia. So those are two countries that have consistently outperformed expectations when you look at student development and performance on international achievement tests. And there are lots of practices in Finland and Estonia that may or may not successfully export to other countries. But what I did was I looked at what they do in their schools and juxtaposed that with evidence from randomized controlled experiments and longitudinal studies that have been replicated in multiple countries. And one of the things that is really striking in both Finland and Estonia is they use a practice called looping, where you get the same teacher for multiple years. And this can be extremely powerful because instead of just specializing in their subjects, it allows teachers to specialize in their students, right? Teachers aren't just instructors. They become coaches. They build relationships with their students. They get to know their individual strengths and their opportunities for growth. And you know, I've heard in the U.S., for example, a lot of parents say, "But you know, what if my kid gets Professor Snape? I don't want to be in the in the class with a bad teacher." Well, obviously, we have to invest in making sure that we get great teachers. But interestingly, this idea of looping, the repeating practice, is more effective for teachers who are struggling more, because those are the teachers who most need to build those personalized relationships with their students. And I think we understand this in other domains. You would never want your kid to have a sports coach just for 1 year if they were starting to thrive together. You would never want your kid to just have rotate to the next piano teacher every year if they made a great connection. And so I think one of the things we need to do societally is to think about how do we build multi-year bonds between students and their teachers, between between kids and their coaches. And I think these effects are often small in the studies, but they've been replicated in multiple U.S. states. They've been tested in Chile, and I think there's real value in those long-term relationships. And it's very hard to have a coach parachute in or a teacher come in just for a day or a week and suddenly change your life.
Well, Adam, this is just fascinating to listening to you, and I know we're getting close to the end of our conversation. I could spend the whole day, if not the whole year, talking about all these matters with you. But let me pick your brains on two things. One is coaching. I mean, I know you spend a lot of time advising top companies around the world, CEOs, leaders, and how to maybe grasp as much as possible from all your analytics in the last years, from giving and taking, originals, thinking again, and now the hidden potential. But do you have like an Adam Grant 5 commandments for a good coach in terms of nurturing the hidden potential?
Ooh, that's a fun question. If I were going to give, I guess if I were going to give guidance to coaches, I would say, gosh, a top 5. Number 1 would be, uh, I think your primary job is not to care about the results, but to care about the person. And of course, the irony of that is you often get the best results when you care about the person that you're coaching. Second would be some of the best learning comes from the questions you ask, not the answers you give. There's a whole body of research on what's called motivational interviewing, showing that if I want to change your behavior, instead of telling you what to do, it's frequently more effective for me to help you find your own reasons for change, which is what Eric did for me when he asked, "Are you going to do this dive? What are you waiting for?" I was summoning my own motivation as opposed to him trying to give me the right carrot or stick. Number 3 would probably be take the people you're coaching and give them a chance to teach and coach. We know that the best way to learn something is often to teach it. And also that when you coach somebody else, you find your own motivation by motivating them. And then I think for 4 and 5, I'd probably say number 4 would be I'd encourage coaches not to be the sole coach. You want the people that you're trying to develop, whether they're students or athletes or employees, you want them to learn from multiple people. And so one of the best ways that you can be a good mentor is to help them find additional mentors who can complement your expertise. And then lastly, I'd say make it fun. We know that people learn more when they're enjoying the process. That if you want to avoid burnout and also bore out, we want to take the slog of deliberate practice and turn it into deliberate play, where it feels like a game. And I think if you do that, people are less likely to quit. They're also less likely to give half-hearted effort.
Well, I think I'm gonna write them down and I'm gonna share them with a lot of friends because I love those 5 commitments. And I mean, I know you have a podcast as well that you're doing great conversations. I know that you're also giving TED Talks. You're doing a lot of things, also continuing with your class. But what happens to me is every time that you come with a book and I finish the book, then I ask myself, okay, what's Adam Grant going to do next? What's keeping you up awake now that might become a future book?
That's a good question that I haven't answered yet. I think one of the things I care a lot about is culture change. I've been thinking a lot about, obviously, improving cultures in organizations, but I think we're struggling, in neighborhoods, in communities. We're struggling with our political institutions, and I think cultural values and norms are a big part of that. And I'd like to figure out how we can do a better job changing those. So that might be a topic I tackle, but let me ask you. First of all, honored that you read my work so carefully and think we need to diversify the authors you engage with if you're reading this many of my books. But what would you like to see me tackle next?
No, now you were mentioning about cultural change. I think it's important because I interviewed some weeks ago John Clifton, the CEO of Gallup, and we were talking about something that is keeping him awake at night. It's about the loneliness epidemic around the world. People feeling lonelier, and also the rapidness in which hate and fear is growing in multiple societies. So when you think about cultural change, I think it's more than needed today to be able to task or to tackle those challenges. So I think that will be an amazing topic, and I encourage you to continue following that line because I think it's something that will have an impact on the public sector and the private sector. But Adam, I can't finish my interview without asking about a passion that you have, and you're an expert. I also share it, but I'm not an expert, and it's magic. Tell us about how you, as an organizational psychologist, but also as a professional magician, How important is magic in your life nowadays?
Well, the nerdiest thing I did in college was co-found a magic club, and it was it was a great experience for me to come out of my shell as a shy introvert and get a little more comfortable on stage and interacting with people. And I don't think I would have become a professor had I not done that. But magic also taught me something that I think about every day. It taught me the value of the element of surprise. That if I told you exactly what was going to happen in most of my tricks, you wouldn't be that entertained. But when I told you I was going to find your card in the deck and then I didn't, and then it magically appears when I throw it against the wall on the other side of the glass, um, that like, wow, okay, I didn't see that coming. And I think so much of the work we do in whether it's writing books or or sharing ideas in other formats is about understanding what are people's expectations and how do we bring science and stories together to help people turn those expectations upside down. I think that's a magician's skill, and it's useful far beyond far beyond those performances.
Well, man, I really look forward to see you soon, and I want you to come to Colombia and present your book. You know, you're more than invited, and we would love to have you, Adam. Such a pleasure to talk to you. Congratulations for all you've done, and congratulations for all you will continue doing. So I send you my best to you, your wife, your family, and as we always say in this podcast, gracias por estar en Tres Respuestas. Un gran placer, Adam Grant.
Gracias a ti también y espero que no piensas otra vez sobre esto.
Muchas gracias, Sam.
Gracias.